It's not easy being a Nintendo fan. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody since I've said it so many times, but the Nintendo Switch 1 was actually my favorite console of all time. It is my favorite console of all time. And that might not necessarily be because of the console itself, but where I was in my life at the timing of the launch of the Switch. As a child, I loved the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 after that. There's a reason I say that Super Mario World and Mario 64 are probably my two favorite games ever. I initially skipped out on the GameCube because my brothers and I both had a PlayStation 2 and an Xbox, and actually before that we also had the Dreamcast. And since that whole console generation was filled with so many cross-platform amazing experiences, oftentimes I find myself reminiscing about the same games as people that did actually own the GameCube. Games like Sonic Adventure 2, Super Monkey Ball, Simpsons Hit and Run. These were some of the most popular games of that generation. So I don't feel like I missed out completely. Now obviously when it comes to the first party games, I did miss out on those. But over time, I've made up for it. I've played the F-Zeros, I've played the Double Dashes, the Melees, Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, and all that. And I played a lot of that on the Wii, which completely blew my mind. When I did that sidestep from the Nintendo 64 to the big boy platforms, I never in a million years thought that I would be jumping back to Nintendo. But the hype with the Nintendo Revolution, the fake trailers like that Nintendo On one, also that they can show us a controller and call it the Wii, and then there was like a South Park episode on it. It was just so much hype and I was just ready for it. And Wii Sports lived up to every expectation that I had of it. And it's not just me, make no mistake about it. If Wii Sports was not included with the Wii never would have been as successful as it was. But even outside of that, Twilight Princess drags you in, and then you play Mario Galaxy, and then you get a Mario Galaxy sequel, Subspace Emissary and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, WarioWare Smooth Moves. There was just so much good and so much fun to be had on the Nintendo Wii. And that same vibe continued into the Wii U if you were a Nintendo fan. It didn't happen immediately. The Wii U had a fairly weak launch lineup. For many people it was overpriced, but for people that love Nintendo, Smash 4, Mario Kart 8, Mario 3D World, allowing you to play a 3D Mario in 4-player co-op, was one of the funnest experiences that I had. Tropical Freeze was a highlight. The Nintendo DS being available on Virtual Console, allowing me to play the games that I played in handheld a decade or so before, only this time on the big screen. It was so fun. Nintendo wasn't selling well. They were doing pretty poorly after the 3DS launched, and they were doing poorly with the Wii U from launch and to the end of its life cycle. So if you happened to be somebody that owned a Wii U and a 3DS, you were getting one of the most customer-friendly Nintendo experiences ever. Between both of those consoles, Nintendo was just giving you so many good games to play. Nintendo Selects were available, so you could buy those games for like 20 bucks. And every time a good game came out, they would give you another bundle so you can get in there. Price drops were prevalent. The rest of the world was laughing at Nintendo fans for being fans of a 3DS and a Wii U. The Wii U more so, obviously. But the Nintendo fans were laughing at the rest of the world when all of those games were selling tens of millions when they were ported over to the Switch. Because we told you they were amazing games, and we told you the Wii U did not deserve the hate that it got. And I can't speak to anybody else, but that was clear to me when the Nintendo Switch came out. The entire premise of the Wii U was to have a console that you can play on TV and you can play it handheld. Yeah, sure, you were limited to being in the vicinity of your home console, but you could still play it handheld on the couch, on your patio, on your bed, in the bathroom. For me and for a lot of people, that was a large selling point for the Wii U. And likewise, that was a big selling point for the Nintendo Switch. You weren't limited to TV usage. You could play the Switch wherever you wanted, as long as you had a charger, because there was only a few hours of battery life. But it was enough. It was more than enough. Before I started this YouTube channel, I'm pretty sure I exclusively played handheld, even if there was a TV in the same room as me. It was just more comfortable for me. I mostly played handheld at home, or if I took my Switch with me to work, I'd be able to sneak in a little gaming session during lunchtime. I think it was just so bizarre to me to be able to play games that looked as good as they did in handheld. There was never anything like it before. Well, there was if you had a Wii U, because that's what I just felt like it was an extension of. The same game that you could play in 1080p on your TV, you were able to play in handheld. It was at 720p, but for Nintendo, that's good enough. I can't speak for everybody, but it wasn't just about the ports of the Wii U that made the Switch feel like it was the true successor to the Wii U. It was that experience of the Wii U evolved, and it evolved in a way that made it so appealing to the entirety of the gaming world. I unironically used to refer to it as the Nintendo Switch U, or the Switch U with two I's in there, because it felt like the next evolution. At least early on it did. The Joy-Cons felt like Wii remotes. One of them even had an infrared sensor on there that I thought for sure was going to lead to some type of Wii games coming in. And instead of the speaker that used to be on the Wii remote, you had HD rumble, which could make noises. So it kind of felt like an evolution of that concept. But during the time of the Nintendo Switch, if you were a Nintendo fan that specifically had followed Nintendo through most of your life and was there during the Wii U and 3DS era, you were generally happy to see the Switch doing well. It almost solidified your opinion that despite what all of these fools out there think, Nintendo is still phenomenal and will not just be a third-party company that makes games for Sony. True Nintendo fans knew that Nintendo would come back. I knew that Nintendo would come back with a bang. But with the Switch doing as phenomenal as it was, with people buying all of these Wii U games, all of these remakes, all of these ports, and even these sequels that feel like they were just based off of the same engine but slightly better, with the record-breaking sales numbers and the growth of the console and the success of Nintendo, you kind of had a chip on your shoulder as a fan of the company. You start to think, yeah, Tropical Freeze should be sold at $60. Nintendo should recover their losses from the Wii U. $20 a month for Nintendo Switch Online is cheap, and you get easy access to all of these games that you love. And if you got somebody on a family plan to split it 5, 6, 7, or even 8 ways, it gets even cheaper with the expansion pass too. This is how I thought. This is how I believe many Nintendo fans think. Obviously, I'm not sitting in their brains. In my mind, I used to look at the people complaining about the Pokemon games being released and just thinking it was dumb to complain because obviously this is what people want and this is what they love. I used to defend them and say that Nintendo actually has nothing to do with what Game Freak puts out too. And that's the only reason they haven't stepped in to increase the polish and the quality. Because I genuinely believe that. And then it turns out Nintendo just didn't care because Pokemon was doing very well with every release. Until the backlash got large enough and the negativity was really starting to flow, forcing Nintendo to have a discussion with Game Freak about using more development time to create a better product. I used to argue that Nintendo did not need price drops on their games, because why would they? People are still buying them, people are still enjoying them. It was annoying that the prices weren't going down, but obviously there's demand for them, so why would you drop the prices? And again, I wanted Nintendo to succeed because the better that they get, the more enjoyable their games could be, theoretically. There were many times where I would think to myself, it feels a little scummy that Nintendo is delaying certain things or pushing back releases, generating timed exclusivity for no apparent reason. But at the end of the day, it was a fairly simple concept in my mind. I had my $300 Nintendo Switch that I bought at launch. I was basically buying all of my games secondhand off of Facebook Marketplace used, even if it meant not necessarily enjoying the games right at launch. And if there was a third-party game that I really wanted to play on a more powerful console, well, I had my Xbox Series X, so I was covered. I shopped sales for indie games because that way I'd be able to take my Switch wherever I wanted for game nights, and that became very useful to me, even if they were a little bit more expensive on the Switch versus on Steam, for example. I had a carrying case and I was able to take 8 controllers with me anywhere I went. And I filled up on third-party controllers because Lord knows I was not going to buy that many Joy-Cons and Pro controllers, especially for family and friends. I had my own Pro controller and that was all that mattered as far as I was concerned. But the point is, I found the Switch to be very affordable. Because of that $300 price tag, because of the games capping off at $60, I was able to convince family and friends to buy Switches so we can have online game nights. Remember, if a console costs $300 brand new, you can find a used one for like $130 or $150. So even if somebody didn't want to spend $300, they could get in there for much cheaper. And it's the same idea with the games. Even if you were to decide you were gonna go buy used only, if the games are $60 or $80, the used games are more expensive if the brand new one is $80. But since that wasn't a discussion, that wasn't an issue. Buying the Switch for you, for your friends, whoever wanted to jump in, it was for the most part affordable. I genuinely don't know how many games the average person buys a year. I'm assuming people listening to this buy more than the average user. I'm assuming I buy more than the average user. But what I do know is that when you buy a Nintendo console, if you have Mario Kart, if you have Smash Brothers, and if you have Mario Party, that's enough to keep most Nintendo fans entertained for over a year. That's enough to cover game nights for an entire console generation. And that's what happened. That's what happened for me. That's what happened for a lot of people that I know. And it happened for a lot of people that are in the same Discord chats that I am, that are on the same forums that I am. The reason why I love the Nintendo Switch as much as I do is not necessarily because of the console that it was. It's because of the experiences I was able to get due to how convenient it was to own that Switch, how affordable it was to convince so many around me to also buy into the Switch. Even something as simple as adding online play to the classic Nintendo 64 games made the Switch that much more enjoyable for my friends and I. Because I know not many people will appreciate this since they find other ways to play their games online or on different hardware with emulators that are better than whatever Nintendo puts on their console. But even if I were to hypothetically have those emulators and play those games on a different device, for the average person that I'm playing with, the people that I know that I grew up with, they're not going to know how to do that. So that still makes the Nintendo Switch Online appealing for somebody like me that plays with people, with lifelong friends, with family members on a regular basis. And through all of this time, I was just happier and happier to see Nintendo succeed. And it made me more and more excited to see the console grow and to see how Nintendo would move forward. And even though I was somewhat disappointed of a lack of innovation coming into the Switch 2, the first thing that was important to me was not only the backwards compatibility of the games, it was the backwards compatibility of all of the accessories, the controllers, because that would allow me to continue my Switch experience without having to worry too much about starting over from the beginning. That would allow me to upgrade to a Switch 2 and be able to continue my Switch 1 experience without having to worry about everybody around me also not upgrading. But then 2 months ago, everything changed. It's been exactly 2 months to the day since I uploaded my Why I'm Not Buying the Nintendo Switch 2 video. I said there was an unwritten understanding, an unwritten contract between Nintendo fans and Nintendo. At the time, I primarily made it focused on the cost of entry, saying that we'll pay whatever we have to pay when it comes to the cost of the games because the cost of entry for the console is affordable, since they are the most affordable way to play, even if the games don't go down in price. But remember, before the Nintendo Switch, they used to go down in price, so that's part of my logic. But I think that unwritten contract should be elaborated a bit. Nintendo fans aren't as blind and naive as some people might think. At least not me, and maybe not some more people. To reiterate what I was saying earlier, we know that Nintendo was making money by selling games that they had sold on the Wii U with limited production costs because they were ports. We know that they were making money on a subscription service for games and then charging for online, even though their online is not up to the standard of the industry. We know that games have frame drops, that there are performance issues, that the tech rarely, if ever, lives up to the industry standards. And we know that we're paying top dollar for games that take us a fraction of the amount of time to complete as a Sony or Xbox AAA title would at that same price point that probably had more development costs up front. And we're okay with that because, and this is entirely subjective, Nintendo games are the most fun games. At least they are for us. A Nintendo title built with that love and proper quality that they're known for, that lasts 10 hours, is worth a 200-hour adventure made by another studio, with the obvious caveat that you are a Nintendo fan and you love what Nintendo puts out. And that's why it's worth it to us to buy the cheaper console, because the experience outweighs the price in our minds. The experience for the passion and the love of the game and the franchise outweighs all of those technical ceilings that continue to be reached elsewhere in the industry. But the issue is, when the Switch 2 prices were announced, when Mario Kart World was announced to have an $80 sticker tag strictly because Nintendo thinks it's worth it for the amount of sales it's going to get, basically, when the Nintendo Switch 1 is going to go into the next generation still without receiving a price drop, when Switch 1 games are going to be sold on the Switch 2 for more expensive than they were on the Switch 1, even if they were out for more than 5 years. When a game like Welcome Tour is going to come in for $10 instead of being a free app automatically downloaded on the home screen of your Switch, when you find out that you might be buying physical games that look exactly like physical games, except they're going to be digital games with nothing but a piece of plastic to allow you to download it on your console, with all of these things adding up, all of a sudden, that unwritten contract feels like it was torn apart. Like there was a breach. As a Nintendo lover, you can take advantage of me to the extent of which I allow it to happen, because at the end of the day, you are the affordable product. Emotionally speaking, I might be willing to pay top dollar for your games because of the nostalgia I have for the franchises and how much I enjoy the quality, but tangibly speaking, I know that this is worth less. I know that the hardware and the software and the tech does not live up to the industry standard. I know that you've ridden out an entire generation by drip feeding releases, cutting costs by reselling old games, and just doing whatever you can to be the most profitable company that you can be. So now, when Nintendo comes to the table with hardware that is not up to the industry standard, and increasing the price of software that is definitely not up to the industry standard, and basically implying to me that you will pay more for this because of how much you love it and not because that's what it's worth, that's when the glass shatters. That's when it becomes clear to myself and to millions of other people out there that are not going to buy the Switch 2. Because at first we were supporting the Nintendo Switch because the support was worth it since it was still within reason. It tangibly made sense to us. But now we're being told that we're going to buy the Nintendo Switch 2 specifically because we love Nintendo games, and that's why the price is what it's going to be at, and that's why all of these anti-customer scummy practices like price gouging are all surfacing. Because Nintendo expects that from how much we love the Nintendo games, we're willing to ignore everything else, regardless of the price. But the problem is, Nintendo forgets that the reason we were able to ignore everything was largely because of the price. The Switch 2 was, unironically, the best decision that Nintendo could make going into the next console. The safest decision. Continue on the Switch 1, and the people that love the Switch 1 will love the Switch 2. But as I've said so many times before in the past 2 months, they're forgetting that part of the reason the Switch was as popular as it was is because of how much cheaper it was from the competition. And while the home menu and the games will indeed look the exact same because many of them are the same games, the cloud around Nintendo is dark and greedy, and the practices they're doing outside of what appears in front of your eyes is very anti-customer. Things like forced arbitration, forcing updates to make their game sharing experience inferior. These things are what is making the Nintendo Switch 2 not feel like the Nintendo Switch 1. And as somebody that has loved Nintendo for his entire life, as somebody that bought the Wii U, bought the Switch, and is pretty strongly against the Switch 2, I am so ready, so hopeful for a poor start to the Switch 2's life. Because in my experience, there is nothing more appealing as a Nintendo fan than a Nintendo company that needs to earn your dollar, especially when compared to a Nintendo company that expects that dollar. And I say this without sarcasm, I say this without any hate, any vitriol. Anybody that is buying the Nintendo Switch 2, I am genuinely happy for you. I think you're going to enjoy it. I know what it means to be a Nintendo fan, buying a new Nintendo console, and getting a new Mario Kart even. But I do say this with confidence. By buying into that Nintendo Switch 2 right now, by not waiting and pushing back against these Nintendo prices and the Nintendo practices in general, there is only one clear trajectory of Nintendo's greed. And I realize for many of you, that's fine. You're only going to buy like one game a year anyway. You don't care. And not everybody has to be a martyr. Not everybody has to sacrifice their enjoyment. Some people bought a Switch back in 2017 and they're finally upgrading and they don't plan on spending $80 on any games. Again, that's fine. But from a macro level, from an industry-wide level, this is actively making Nintendo a worse version of itself. And if you don't feel it right now, if you don't feel it next year, if you don't feel it in 3-4 years from now, at some point you will notice it and you will feel it. I didn't feel it until April 3rd, 2025. And millions of Nintendo fans felt it with me at the same time. Millions of die-hard Nintendo lovers that love our Nintendo experiences probably as much, if not more, than the people that are buying their consoles. And if we felt our limit and got turned away from Nintendo, then I have no doubt that the same will happen to you eventually. Because by enabling Nintendo, they will get greedier and greedier as time goes on. I just really hope, for the sake of this company that makes games that I've always loved, for the sake of this entire industry, that they are actually not doing as well as they're trying to pretend they are. But yeah, that was my retrospective of the Nintendo Switch 1 and how much I loved that console. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you guys on the next one.